Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited about today's conversation. My guest is Dr. Michael Daniels, a board-certified pediatric, surgeon, MBA, and the founder and president of CMO of We Treat Feet Podiatry, a practice he started in Baltimore in 2002 that now spans more than 12 locations across Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C. What makes Dr. Daniels uniquely qualified for today's topic is that he hasn't just lived the patient experience challenge from the inside, he's written the playbook on it. He's published 3 books covering practice growth, medical economics, and clinical care, and has been recognized as a top Baltimore doctor for 2 years running. Dr. Daniels, welcome and glad to have you.
Thank you, Norman. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I'll just go ahead and start with a framing question. So patient experience gets used a lot in healthcare. Sometimes it means satisfaction scores. Sometimes it means wait times. Sometimes it means the whole arc of how a patient feels before, during, and after a visit. In your world, running a 12-location podiatry group over the last 2 decades, what does the patient experience actually mean to you? And where do you think most private practices get it wrong from the start?
So it's a very interesting question. I appreciate you framing it that way. I think the patient experience really has 2 components on a private practice scale. When you're in a facility scale, a hospital system, they worry about Press Ganey scores and it affects their Medicare rankings, which boils down to payment issues and all the like. So the hospitals are all kind of crazy about trying to get these surveys filled out with the best positive scores. Sometimes it becomes a little bit overkill. And my opinion, that makes it start to sound a little fake. And I think people pick up on that too, because you see the receptionists and the medical assistants just get the living daylights beat out of them about you have to do this, this, and this, and they try to do that. But if it's not understanding why you're doing or not buying into why you're doing, it really just doesn't come off that way. Fortunately, we don't have that issue in private practice, and our satisfaction is basically whether or not our patients come back or refer their friends. So we're on a little bit of a different wavelength than they are. And when it comes to us, I break that down really into 2 aspects. Number 1 is the office. Number 2 is the physician. I've had many a case where, patients come and they corner me in the little 10 by 10 exam room when we're, dealing with their issue. And I have to spend any time is too much time discussing how my phone was answered or whether or not the receptionist said hello when they walked into the office. We got a negative review on Google once because somebody said there was dirt on our chair. so, so they just, some people want to complain and some people have legitimate gripes. They do. Every once in a while, like everybody else, you fall a little bit behind. From my perspective, most patients are very understanding when it comes to physician schedulings and, how busy all the physicians have become in this world. But I got yelled at this week too, because I all of a sudden found myself behind and the gentleman thought it was too long to wait for the service he was getting that day. And I apologize. It's all you can really do. Whenever we talk to our marketing people and our comms team, they're always really big about getting patient reviews. Oh, we need patient reviews. They need to go on Google. They need to go on Yelp. And most of us consider that to be fairly demeaning to sit there and say, hey, can you give me a 5-star review because you liked my pizza? So it's really tough too, because the other thing is you want patients to be able to give you honest feedback, but you also don't want them to feel uncomfortable in having to do it. So there's a very fine line there. We have a survey on our website that patients can go and fill out. And, we do 40 to 50,000 patients a visits a year. We get like 3 people who fill them out. So it's not exactly a large enough, data set to be able to get really, really good. But I look at it, and how we look at it for our doctors is as podiatrists, there's not a lot of one and done visits. Not a lot of people come in for just once and never come back, at least, or don't have a treatment plan to come back. So when we look at the number of people who came for an initial visit and never had a second visit, we start to look at our doctors that way. And if we find that one has an unusually large amount, it means either A, they're just the luck of the draw getting patients who really don't have long-term needs and only have a certain specific issue, or possibly that they're not relating to the patients and therefore the patients aren't coming back. Some people will be kind enough to call you and tell you they had a problem, and somebody else will put a bad review on Google. So it's all a matter of just kind of trying to, master expectations. And that's really done in the treatment room, having a conversation similar to how we are when somebody's, sitting 6 feet in front of me and it's just the 2 of us.
I understand. Well, thank you for answering that so thoroughly. I understand. So one of the things our audience thinks about constantly is patient acquisition, not just volume, but finding patients who are generally the right fit for their services. You've built a brand that clearly resonates across a pretty wide geography. What are the most effective moves you've made to attract high value patients who stay, who refer, who are a good clinical fit? And what do you think most practices are underinvesting in when it comes to that?
So I think back to when I started in practice in 2002, and the majority of our marketing dollars were spent on either yellow page ads and or individual outreach to practices. We would go to primary care physicians and, bring cookies and candy and pens and all that good stuff too. And that was where our marketing budget was spent. And these days, most people don't know what the yellow pages was. And I haven't gotten one in years either. So I know that it exists online, but I don't know if they even print them anymore. So, and it was a big deal, the size of your ad, and was it on the right or the left side of the page? And, was it, it was a big deal to, all of those little things. And today they mean practically nothing. So I remember in 1999, I was in school still, and I'm sitting there, it's like fall break, and I'm thinking, this internet thing is looking pretty good. That sock puppet from pets.com, I think that's clearly going to make it. I'm like, I better get a website because someday I'm going to need one. And I sat around and with my wife, who was brand new at the time, who is still my first wife. I'm still married. I don't know how sometimes. I don't know how she puts up with me. And we just came up with a list of just different things that were podiatry related. And one of them was We Treat Feet. And when we went through the domain registrar, it was available. So in 1999, I registered We Treat Feet, having no idea that it would eventually become, the basis of our entire marketing and comm strategy is built on, this one term. And, now we own it. We own a service mark. So sorry, you cannot become We Treat Feet either. I own it, and my lawyers would send you a lovely letter, I'm sure. But now that we had this, and this started right around 2007 is when we really started to build this, when we first had our first marketing consultant in the office who is retired and is a patient now. And, he started to say to me, what is We Treat Feet? What is the brand? And I'm like, brand? I don't know. Is it Raisin Brand? I have no idea what he's talking about. And, subsequently through going through the process of doing radio and print and television, and then subsequently moving online, and then going back to school and getting a master's where, listen, I had one class in advertising. So, that must make me an expert, right? We found ways to develop skills through online searches that built reputation. And today we implore a couple of different people. We have a firm that does our social media posting. We have a firm that does our Google ad posting, and we have a firm that does our SEO and backlinking along with web page management. And I do the majority of the content for these things, but they do the actual make them look pretty and post them because, yeah, I'm not an artist. And they do. And what I've found over the years is the majority of our dollars have stopped flowing to all of these traditional media outlets and have started flowing into these basically internet bubbles. And we spend a lot of money on Google AdWords, and we spend a lot of time trying to build our reputation score in Google with good, solid content that people will want to read, and constantly amazed because we'll spend a good amount of time on certain specific conditions or things that are going on, or trying to, attract patients that have problems that, we deem to be more profitable, for example. And then the number one page hit on our website is hydrogen peroxide and toenails. It's a post I wrote 5 years ago. Still to this day, every month, it's the number one thing that people hit on. So every time I think I might get this internet thing down, I look at our numbers and I'm like, really? I haven't touched that page in 5 years, and that's the one that people find? So somebody could they find you in weird ways. But the other thing is, the first strategy that I employed that we've stopped doing but was really successful was a billboard strategy in the local metropolitan area. And I was a big believer in, the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. So we would have things, and all ours would say foot pain, WeTreatFeet.com. That was it. Diabetic foot, WeTreatFeet.com. That was it. Because you ever drive by a billboard, there's 37 things on it, you can't read any of them. Well, we didn't want that to happen. And having a catchy name, it started to really build because people would remember us having driven by a sign. I tried to get a little funny. I did Broken Souls, SOLES. So some people thought I couldn't spell, but the rest of them kind of got it. And, that would attract people. And as I said, nowadays it's a lot of marketing and media content, being guests on shows such as yours. Thank you again for having me.
No,
Trying to
absolutely.
put some video up there. I'm not so big at
Thank you.
making videos of myself. I don't particularly, think the face that you want to sell, use to get your foot taken care of. Although people don't mind there, but maybe I'm better heard than seen. I don't know. But either way, we try to put some content up there, and video's fairly big. And then, now as I'm kind of, matured in my practice and I'm looking at what comes next, I've gotten a little bit more involved in the business side of, practice and doing some consulting work regarding many different topics related to medicine, and started to write a lot. I was recently published on dietary supplements that we recommend to patients. So and that's interesting to me because people seem to think that I write well. I mean, I did have a liberal arts undergraduate degree, so they do teach you how to write, but I'm never enamored with my own writing. But it seems to resonate pretty well, and it's nice when you talk to journalists and authors, and they're looking for background, and you give them, and they're like, "Oh, wow, that was so thorough. Thank you." And I'm like, "Oh, you're very welcome." I mean, I was thinking I was doing a competent job. I didn't think there was anything that special about it, but it seems to resonate with people. So you throw all this stuff together, and this is how we're kind of building the brand out to larger scale. The issue is you're building a larger practice or building a larger platform in a declining market. There are more patients, there are more needs, but there's fewer doctors and reimbursement is declining. So, at some point we're going to reach that equilibrium where costs are going to overrun revenues. Some months they already do. And it's getting tougher and tougher to do. So I'm fortunate to be closer to the end than the beginning of my practice career, but I still do have a few years to go. So we're still trying to make sure that we can kind of promote the practice in a way that keeps people coming in the door.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, and thank you for explaining that very thoroughly. So, health insurance is probably the single biggest pain point in private practice. You were just speaking about a little bit about some of the ways that you guys bring people in the door. Health insurance is probably the single biggest pain point in private practice. It affects cash flow, patient relationships, and clinical decision making in ways that residents are completely unprepared for. You got an MBA where healthcare management concentration. You've written about practice economics. You've navigated this for more than 20 years. How do top providers think about insurance differently than average ones? And in a world that's clearly moving away from fee-for-service, what's the strategic posture you recommend?
I always start with explaining that, being here in the Mid-Atlantic, the way the Affordable Care Act was set up on the state exchange and the way Maryland went about setting up their exchange probably is one of the more successful models in the country. Our uninsured rate here in Maryland is very, very low. If I see, one uninsured patient a month, it would be a lot. And that includes the hospital where we literally get homeless people that have insurance. It's really that good. Yeah, I never ceases to amaze me, that everybody seems to have insurance. And if you're a child, you have insurance because the state covers all the kids. So, we never see kids without insurance anymore. That being said, is we also live in an environment where we never had any real capitation. So we never really had to live in that economic model where other practices and doctors I've spoken to had to. That being said, I think that we're one of the unique practices that insurance is not as big a pain point as people seem to make it out to be. Most of the insurance companies, if you know the rules and you can send out clean claims, will pay you. The problem is not that. The problem is when they decide to do audits, and they all hire these auditing firms, and all these auditing firms are now using AI, and they're looking at statistical analyses to try to determine which ones they could grab to see the notes to do clawbacks with. And unfortunately, when it comes to medical documentation, standard is perfection. So, for example, Medicare produces all of these rules for what has to be in notes for specific codes. And if they have in their local carrier determinant, their LCD, 20 things, and you have 19 of those, but not one of them, and despite the fact that the patient needed it, it was medically necessary, and it actually helped the patient, they will do a clawback. And I find that to be one of the most unfair systems ever developed, because name one other profession where it's perfection or nothing. I guess maybe our astronauts who went to the moon, if they weren't perfect, they'd be floating by Mars right now. But, it kind of gets a little extreme. That being said, if you take a look from the business side, the business of health insurance is very, very robust and is an absolutely brilliant model. whoever came up with this concept of fee for service with third party payers is a genius. Think about it. You come to see me because your bunion hurts. And I say, okay, Norman, well, you're going to need an NSAID and an X-ray and that. And you say, okay. And we do that and, shake hands and you leave. And I then fill out this paperwork, send a bill to a third party. The third party sends me back partial payment and says, oh, Mr. Norman has, a 30% copayment. So now I have to send you a bill for the 30%. And who are you usually mad at? Because it's not them, it's me.
True.
Because people say all the time, is this covered? I'm like, I don't know. It's your insurance. You should know what your insurance covers. We deal with hundreds of these things. So, and we do verifications and everything else. So we try to avoid surprises as much as possible. But in the end of the day, you got a third party payer who's just laughing because he's getting premiums from you and you're mad at me. It's brilliant. You can't come up with a better business than that. So, not to mention is I see you and sometimes I have to wait 28 days to get paid for that visit too. So, there's a lot of things that go on. So at the end of the day, how does this kind of shake out? And you look at it like, for example, 2 years ago in 2024, Medicare cut physician fee schedule 2.8%. And then this year they gave us back what they called 2.5%, but based on the way they figured it out, it's actually 2.1%. So in real actual dollars, we're getting paid less today than we did 2 years ago for the same service. And then if you adjust it for inflation, it just makes you cry. So how are we supposed to, keep the lights on and keep patients coming through in that environment? As I said, one day we're going to get to the point where we can't anymore. And then what happens? Are we going to swing as a society where patients start expecting to pay cash for services up front? Are we already there? What about people who legitimately cannot afford it? It becomes kind of a conundrum to talk about. So you have to kind of take a step back and realize, Medicare is already in the red. They're spending more money than they're taking in. Yet, depending on who you believe, somewhere between 7 to 12 cents of every dollar is what actually goes to the doctors. So if let's be generous and call it 12 cents of every dollar, and you're going to cut that 2.8% and make a difference, it's kind of like throwing Dixie cups of water on your house fire. It doesn't make any sense because at the same time they were doing that cut, they were raising outpatient fees and they were raising hospital fees, and the hospitals need them to survive as well. They got to keep their lights on, but at the end of the day, there's not enough money. So what do we do as a society? And I will tell you, if I had the answer to that, you would be interviewing me on my private island.
Understand. The next question is a little bit different. It's less about insurance, but more about technology. So technology in healthcare is a crowded conversation. EHRs, AI triage tools, patient portals, telehealth, diagnostic, ultrasound. You've been in a provider side and a consultant side working with medical device companies and equipment manufacturers. What's your honest take on where technology is actually moving the needle or a patient experience versus where it's creating more friction than it solves?
It's interesting. This morning I was watching a news story where they were talking about AI eliminating large swaths of white collar jobs in the next 5 to 10 years, and how society is going to have to adjust. And how a lot of people are worried about that. They referenced that Jensen Huang, who runs NVIDIA, doesn't even want to touch the subject to discuss it because their company makes the chips that really run artificial intelligence. And the guest was listening to the reporter, make this case here, and he said, well, the same thing happened during the Industrial Revolution, and yet we still have factory workers. So at the end of the day, it's just an adjustment. We will adjust because there will be people who need to do things. I think if we get to the point where we really had that, then maybe The Terminator was a documentary and not a movie. I do tease patients about that when we use AI, because in our office, we use AI ambient listening for documentation purposes. And it's currently being sold to doctors as this time saver. Oh, when you walk out of the room, your note and your billing's already done. Yeah, it kind of is, but it kind of isn't, because no matter how good the AI system is, they hallucinate. They make mistakes. They get confused between the doctor, the patient, and a third person in the room. And you have to literally go through it, or you have very strange things in your medical records. And, it's virtually impossible for me to sit down and read 30 or 40 notes from end to end. And I know generally where to look for things that I'm looking that I know there might be issues in, but I miss things. And sometimes the staff find them and they can be amusing. I have a whole list of stuff my AI says that I keep saying I'm going to start a Twitter handle, and every day I'm going to put a new one out there to see if somebody can interpret what it actually means. But you have that. Secondary issue is when you talk about AI is, these concepts of AI phones, AI receptionists, AI front desk people. Prior to this call, I had to call my insurance company, and I had AI. And after the third time it asked me a question, I was getting fairly frustrated with it because I thought it was a very, very simple question. And all of a sudden, AI wanted to ask me 47 questions where all I needed to do was speak to somebody. That's it. Once I got to somebody, it was over in 2 seconds. But it took 7 minutes to get to that person because AI kept asking me questions. So we did try an AI phone system. It failed miserably. I would always advise people to remember that when you're talking to AI, it is recording and transcribing everything you say. We had some very interesting responses to our AI when we tried it. And, there's nothing funnier than, when this little sweet 85-year-old grandma starts cursing out your AI like a drunken sailor. You can't do anything but laugh, and people just don't realize that it's there. And then you
Yeah,
have the whole
true.
then you have the whole back end issue when it comes to billing and posting, which by the way is not new. We've had automatic billing and posting for years. Now they just introduce AI to it, which I think means they just charge more for it. But you do have it from a scheduling standpoint, staff management standpoint, as far as supply chain. It has an issue here if you can, really get it up. And I think big practices, much bigger than mine, are, doing some really good things, especially when it comes to just-in-time efforts for supply control and those sort of things. We're too small for that. I mean, again, we can kind of create our own little internal processes, but some company that builds a system like that, is going to want hundreds of thousands of dollars for it, and we don't have the budget for that. So I think that will be hospital systems. I think can benefit from these things, but at the end of the day, too, it's hard to see that AI really understands the whole depth. I mean, it understands what you tell it. So, you can tell it, okay, well, I'm going to need more Band-Aids in June than I am in December because people are going to skin their knees more falling down in June because in December it's cold and they won't be going outside quite as much. But what will that really do to the quantity of Band-Aids? Are you really going to order more and or less based on the time of year, just based on that assumption? What if it's Indian summer? I'm sorry, I think that might be offensive these days, so I apologize if I just offended anybody. But okay, so now it's December, but it's 75 degrees out and people are still skinning their knees. You don't have a Band-Aid shortage, right? How does AI kind of account for those sort of things? There's a human factor there that has to be taken into account. So
I agree.
there are certain medical specialties that, need to be on notice. There's been a couple of studies recently that have come out comparing human radiologists to AI radiologists. And guess what? The AI radiologists do pretty well. One of my best friends from college is a cardiologist. I read an article a couple months ago about how the stethoscopes were now, telling the doctor exactly what's going on instead of them having to listen and interpret themselves. And I sent my buddy the story, and with the caption, "You're 10 minutes away from being replaced." And his response was, "Good thing I'm 9 minutes away from retirement." So I think that's kind of the plan for most of us at this stage in our lives, is just to kind of wait it out and let the younger guys see it. But when you have younger doctors coming out of residency with several $100,000 worth of debt, and you have all these AI initiatives to save money, well, if it does save money, it's not like they're going to take extra money and give them to the doctors. They're probably going to result in needing fewer doctors too. So the spiral that you find yourself in can make it insane if you really kind of play it out. At the end of the day, what you have to do is you have to make yourself needed. And that can mean different things for different specialties. I don't think we're going to have any AI dentists anytime quickly because, what's the AI dentist going to do when you gag on the little mirror thing they put in there? So,
Yeah, I definitely agree. It does require a human element that is definitely still required with AI. I agree with you 100%.
yeah, I mean, with a psychiatrist, are we going to have one of those Elon Musk robots sitting there talking to people? I mean, who knows?
Right. So diabetic foot care is a space where the stakes are extraordinarily high. We're talking about limb preservation. You talk about that on your website. Quality of life, downstream hospitalization costs. You've dedicated a major part of your career with this, including your book Primer to Diabetic Foot and your work at the Northwest Hospital Wound Center. In that context, what does excellent patient experience look like, and what has the practice done specifically to improve outcomes for the patient population where others have struggled?
So right now, the big thing in wound care are cellular tissue products. And part of the problem with them is the fact that Medicare went from spending something like $10 million to like $2 billion a year on them within 2 years or 3 years. It was some ridiculously fast expansion. So they really cut back on those. And these products are pretty revolutionary as far as aiding people. So when I talk to companies that are looking to, either start or purchase a platform or, trying to understand the market necessity for these things, especially given the price, I tell them all the same thing is you can't you can fix the health, or at least attempt to fix the health, but you can't fix the underlying cause, which is just utter noncompliance. It's just that simple. It's people who ignore their problems, people who don't listen, people who think they know better. I always amazed at somebody who thinks they know better than me, yet they came to me for the advice. Okay, listen, hey, I just work here, bud. So, and when you talk about and you look at the patient population, I don't have a lot of really rich people having diabetic foot amputations. Bill Gates is not my patient. My patients tend to be poor. They tend to be much lower on the socioeconomic spectrum. They tend to be less educated. They tend to be less trusting of the system. And, I can't answer why. I'm not a sociologist, but, that's a universal truth throughout healthcare, and it's not unique to wounds. But, you have people who have trouble making their appointments because they may not have access to reliable transportation. You have patients who can't afford bandages to actually put on their foot because they're expensive. And all of these things increase your amputation rate. So my career has been dedicated to trying to find alternative ways to help patients who either can't or for sometimes just won't help themselves. And I tell people all the time, I do wounds, and unfortunately business is really good. I find it to be the only thing left in podiatry that really interests me. I have to do another bunion, I'm going to shoot myself. There's only so many you can do, but all the wounds are different, and it's not just the wound, it's the whole package that comes with people. So I end up swimming in the deeper end of medicine sometimes, if you want to put it, because I have to be in touch with the vascular surgeons and the endocrinologists and the primary cares. And, it's a circle of care that these patients really, really need. And if we can get them in there and we can get them to buy in it enough to do everything they can, then we increase our success rates. And listen, there's multiple things that show that successful management of these patients in a multidisciplinary environment really does make a difference. You find a shift in the whole way that doctors think, not just specifically about this, but in general. And it relates back to just the shifting tides of medicine and the way insurance and regulation has really just beat the daylights out of doctors. It's literally beat the living soul out of them. And as a result, now you have guys who are getting trained by guys who, are, I don't want to say soulless because I don't need to insult anybody, that's it. But literally, they've just been beaten up by the system. And it's the system all of a sudden doesn't matter. So the calling to be a doctor, the hanging a shingle and being in an office for 30 years, that's all gone. And now as we interview doctors, they want to work 8 to 4:30 and they don't want to do weekends and they don't want to take call and, they don't want to do this or they don't want to do that. Well, you do what comes in your door. You can't say, oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not treating ingrown toenails anymore. You're going to have to go somewhere else. No, that's what comes in. That's what you got to do. It's the same thing with people who have bunions or the same thing with people who have wounds. So when you have this kind of shifting demographic and, I have kids who are now part of this generation where they value experience much more than security. So it's amazing to me how many people are, coming in, they're going to take our first, take an offer, our first job offer standards are 3 years and expect to move on at the end of 3 years. So whatever they build over these 3 years, they don't seem to care that it's just gone or it's going to somebody else. And that's a very, very foreign concept to me because when I went done, you finished residency and you bought a practice or you joined a practice and bought in and that was the way to go. And that's what everybody did. But nowadays there's so many employed physicians with health systems and there's so fewer physicians in private practice. And that number continues to drop exponentially that you get doctors who are just doing a job. And when medicine becomes a job, it's scary. I mean, who's going to take care of us when we're old if the attitudes of the younger doctors, and I completely admit that this is a generalization, but if they don't change and they're like, yeah, it's 2:30 in the morning. You're gonna have to wait till 6 when I get there. I hope you don't die from your heart attack. And
Right.
that's dramatic, but literally you get to situations like that where the doctors just don't want to be bothered outside of hours. And that's not the profession I chose. So I worry a little bit about that because seriously, who's going to take care of us? Because then everybody gets dumped into the emergency room and the emergency room doctors are completely overwhelmed. And a lot of these conditions, they're not the ones that need to be treating them. They're just really stabilizing people and trying to keep them alive until someone like me gets there to take them to the OR. And what happens if somebody like me says, "Yeah, I can't make it till 7:30. Sorry."
And it's interesting you say that because I've my mom goes to the hospital to get treatment for doctors and stuff like that, and she told me the other day how proud of the emergency room was when just doing a random visit. I think she was having hyperventilating, and they came in, picked her up, and brought her there. But she told us how busy the ER room was. So completely understand. So our audience is primarily founders and decision makers in private medical and dental practices. People who are growing, who are wrestling with the same insurance headaches and patient acquisition challenges you've navigated. If you could point to one or two things that top providers do differently, levers that actually move patient experience and practice health, what would those be, do you think?
I think the number one thing, which again, I hate to be cynical, but I think they need to remember their patients are not the problem. They're patients. The system literally is set up to be adversarial in nature. You ever watch TV during dinner? You can see, everybody screaming about medical mistakes, call me in, we'll get you money, those sort of things. So it kind of sets up this adversarial relationship. I had this week alone, I had somebody tell me that they were unhappy and they weren't looking to sue, but they wanted this, this, and this. And I'm just like, okay, well, nobody's going to want to take care of you if you talk to people like that. It's just wrong. So, the respect that used to come just because you had a DR in your name has also eroded away. And that's another one of these things that just beats the life out of physicians. But at the end of the day, one of the problems doctors don't realize, and it's very important, is nobody is sympathetic when doctors make less money. Doctors traditionally are well paid and well compensated and wealthy and do very well. And, they have the things that, most people don't. They're the top 5%ers. So, when you start complaining that they're cutting you, well, nobody cares because guess what? You're still making a lot more than they are, or doing a lot better than they are. That being said, there's only a certain percentage of the population that knows what it takes to get to this level. I don't care if you're an internist or a neurosurgeon or a veterinarian or a dentist. It is not an easy road. And you sacrifice a lot, depending on when you went. For me, it was basically my whole 20s to do this. Friends from college were getting jobs and, buying cars and having, houses. And, I was living on ramen noodles going to school. Nowadays, it's a little bit different because, I don't have to worry about eating ramen noodles because there's way too much sodium in them. But that being said, it's hard. And I think the lack of sympathy that doctors feel from patients when it comes to these sort of things is just misunderstood. I think, they're too busy walking a mile in their own shoes and not walking a mile in somebody else's shoes and taking a look back to see. So it's really a privilege to get to take care of people. Everybody who comes in your door, you need to treat them like gold because those are the ones that, feed your kids and pay your mortgage. And if you don't take care of people, those things become harder and harder and harder to do. So there's all these things that stack up when you're also in a society where lots of common courtesies seem to be disappearing as well. So it's a tough one, but I would definitely say, one is treat your patients like gold. The first business partner I ever had in medicine told me to treat your patients like family, but don't trust them. And, make sure you realize that you have the privilege of being able to do this. And at the end of the day, I work in a nice, comfy, climate-controlled office. I'm not outside in the heat or the snow. I'm not, in the dirt. I'm not searching. I would normally say I'm not around any bugs, but I do infections, so I get lots of bugs from infections. But the point being is it's a pretty clean and a pretty, hands-off job as far as it's not physically taxing. And there are some things, but for the general part, again, it's not working construction where, or crawling into a fire on the ground floor so you don't get killed while you're trying to put out the fire where everybody's running by you. So I think that's one thing that seems to be lost with doctors is just what a privilege it is to do this job.
But you guys are still doing the hard work. So, we really appreciate doctors like you who do stuff like that.
Thank you.
Very much so. So I'm just this is pretty much the last question. So where do you see patient experience going in private health care overall the next 3 to 5 years? Or what are the trends you're watching? And what are you doing inside We Treat Feet right now to stay ahead of them?
Well, I think one of the problems is the trend, and there's been some to suggest that maybe this is turning, but right now the trend is away from private practice physician. It's employed physicians either by health systems, hospitals, or being consolidated and rolled up by private equity. And the problem is, the private equity guys, when they form platforms, all go in with the right ideas of how they're going to take care of patients. And then as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, you get more levels of bean counters in between the doctor and the C-suite, and those things start to kind of go away. And patients notice when their doctors are not able to do certain things. It becomes evident at some point. And I don't think people realize that it's kind of dangerous because the doctor is making the medical decision, but that medical decision is becoming more and more confined to a narrower range. And, insurance companies do this too. So I don't want to bash private equity by any means, because I think, they may end up being part of the solution instead of the problem. But again, it's going to take this normal equilibrium between how hard it is, how long it takes, and how much it costs to become a doctor with what your earning potential is and what you have to return in loan payments and what you have to sacrifice for your family on the other end. People are constantly surprised at me when I say I'm in the hospital. Why are you in the hospital at 4 a.m? I'm like, well, because I got 12 patients I got to see, and I start patients at 8, and I got to get them done, and it takes a while. I can't go in there at 7:30 and be here in the office at 8. It's not how it works. So it's the sort of thing that people need to really kind of take a look at from a global perspective, and whether or not that means we have more subsidized medical school students, or we do things to promote certain specialties that are underserved, primarily primary care, which is massively underserved right now. Those things are really where the answers lie. Because again, if it's less expensive to get to be a doctor, that takes some of the burden off. But again, if you go and you do a very, very long, intense program, something, like neurosurgery, where you could be between medical school and residency 12 to 15 years, you're 42 and you're getting out and finishing and starting your first job with $350,000 in debt. And that's, so you got to make 700, just to pay it off. So it's really a tough one. But again, you look at some of the other systems in the world that people point to, and, the average wait time in Canada to get a total knee replacement is 48 weeks was the last statistic I saw. In Britain, and in Germany, they have 2-tier systems where there's a public system and a private system. And guess what they say about the public system? So, there's no perfection. And as I said, if I had the answer, I'd be talking from my private island. I think about it a lot, but I do think that the, adjunct of APPs, assistant providers, whether it be nurse practitioners or physician's assistants, to really kind of, be the ground floor or the guys in the trenches for this stuff is really where it goes. Because if they can handle, just the average everyday things and take those off the plates of, the higher compensated physicians, then they would have more time and access to patients who have higher level needs. The same thing happens, though, is again, then it becomes a volume issue because they have student loan payments and the like. So that's where it's going. You'll see more, and there may not be any more primary care physicians anymore. They may be primary care providers who then, kick upstairs once you get to a certain level of complexity. I'm not an internist or a family practice guy, so I can't say what that necessarily is, nor am I a nurse practitioner or a PA who, as I said, they're the ones in the trenches right now. They really are the first line of defense, and I don't think they necessarily get the respect they deserve for that, because it's hard. It's a lot of hard work and a lot of stuff that you do when you're an intern or a lower level resident that you're grateful not to have to do anymore. And that's what these people choose to do for the rest of their careers. And I always say, God bless them. I also can't figure out how PAs can possibly get all the information they need in PA school and be able to go out and practice the way they do. It blows my mind, because you have to be something really smart to do that. Because it took me 4 years to get through foot school, and they go through PA school for everything in 2 years. it must be intense. So I have a lot of respect
Yeah.
for my PA colleagues.
I understand. I understand. Once again, Dr. Daniels, it's been amazing talking to you. This has been incredibly practical and forward thinking. Exactly what our audience needs to hear. I really appreciate your openness in the specifics you shared, and thank you for taking the time to speak to us today. Really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. It's been fun. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you again.